Button has been pressed.
Hi.
Yay!
Oh, hello.
Hello.
So, welcome to Sprinting and why your company needs to let you do it. This is a session where I thought I'd bring together a lot of people who do a lot of contributions and talk about what sprints are, why they're important, why you should care, why you should go to a sprint, and maybe share some stories from the sprint battlefield.
Ooh. I guess in order.
You replaced Michael.
Easily replaced.
I'm Sarah Thrasher. I'm a front-end architect at Acquia. I actually do a lot less sprinting than I used to because I got a 3-year-old now, but that's just life.
I'm Kotzer, or Scott, Drupal Solutions Lead at Digital Echidna, and also a Drupal 8 core committer. And yeah.
Steve Persh, lead developer advocate at Pantheon. Before working at Pantheon, I worked first as a freelance developer and then a few agencies here in Chicago, Mighty Bytes and Palantir.net.
I'm Fatima. I'm a backend developer at Digital Echidna.
And
I do sprint mentoring. And I'm going to be the triage sprint lead at Nashville, which is my second time mentoring, but I guess it went really well last time, so yeah.
What's a sprint?
We'll get to that soon.
We're on the intro slide. Come on.
Oh.
What are sprints? Well, you didn't introduce yourself.
I'm Michael. I wear a lot of hats. What are sprints?
Why is it my job to know it?
I don't know. What are sprints?
So
Does everybody know what a sprint is?
No.
Hey, scrubber.
So
Let's just review.
a lot
review.
of people coming together in a room to work on various things together, and it is often but not always code. There's other kinds of sprinting you can do. You can do sprinting on documentation. You can get together. You can work on designs and UX testing, like basically anything having to do with like project collaboration with other people.
And sprints are often held at events like Drupal camps, DrupalCon, but sometimes there's just one-offs, or sometimes there's events like the Midwest Developer Summit, for example, that is usually in Ann Arbor, and or has been recently anyway, and that's a much more sprint-focused event with little to no presentations and just all about the sprinting.
There's also like an annual sprint day that happens
Right.
everywhere where like all the Jugs, like the Drupal local meetups, will all have a sprint event in their local area, and then people will come and they'll all work on like moving maybe one issue forward or one module or something.
Oh, and they can be held virtually.
Yeah, that too.
Right, yeah, you don't have to always be in the same room.
I think it's earlier in the year because I think we've passed it already.
Yeah.
Yeah. Michael will look that up.
I'm waiting for internet.
Sometimes companies will host regular ones. So like a couple of places I worked have had like in-office, either like beginner sprints or just like get local people together to do similar things. So it's not always necessarily like like a specific like Drupal event. It can happen at like your local community level too.
Mm-hmm.
January. Late January.
Hmm. So do people know what sprints are now? Does that make sense?
Do you have some sort of objectives with them?
Yeah, typically. So one of the kind of definitions like that is, I guess, agreed upon in our community is that it's usually it's sort of a focused, like shorter focused amount of work. So I think successful sprints anyway typically have some sort of goal in mind. So whether it's like working on a specific initiative, let's say in Drupal core, or like porting a module, or like working on a specific feature. But at the same time, if you have a lot of people, you don't necessarily need to have one goal. You can split up into, like if it's a DrupalCon, for example, you can have, one table is media and another table is, Twig or whatever, and everyone's just getting stuff done, learning. So we've talked about what sprints are. So why should you care? Why should you care?
I guess one of the things that I learned from the mentoring team was that whenever someone walks into the sprint room and doesn't really know where to go, they ask them, like, what's the one problem you have with Drupal? Or, like, what's something that really, really bugs you? And then, like, direct them to the right table that might be working on something like that, so they can fix the thing that bugs them. And then you feel, like, really accomplished that you, like, contributed back.
So it's like the sort of scratch your own itch approach?
Yeah, scratch your own itch.
And then another approach would be to kind of say, like, typically, like, people at events like this, they'll have some sort of expertise, even if it's not in Drupal, but, you know, maybe they're, Mauricio gave a lightning talk yesterday, and he was talking about people who come to his beginner sessions, and they've been like a database administrator for 20 years, so like they know a lot about databases, even if they don't necessarily know a lot about Drupal. So seeing someone come into the sprint, you can ask, you know, what are you strong at, what do you enjoy doing, and that can be used to kind of help point them in a direction towards, like, oh, hey, these people are working on the database abstraction layer for Drupal. Maybe they would really be able to use your skills in something that they're working on.
If you're at something like DrupalCon or MidCamp, it also gives you an opportunity to actually use the things you've been listening to people talk about, like, immediately after hearing about them. So, like, I think it's really, from a selfish angle, very educational.
Yeah, and I think just in terms of core and even also in modules, like, if you start to, from a code perspective, if you start to look at the guts of the things that you use every day, like if you start to look at the guts of the routing system or something that powers, you hit a URL and then it translates that into a certain controller in Drupal, like, you can learn the inner workings of that, and then if you run into some kind of weird behavior in a day-to-day, maybe you can be like, oh, that's, this route object doing this thing, so I know how to at least debug that, or I know where to start.
Or who to email about it.
Or who to email about it.
Or Slack.
Or which category in the issue queue to start looking at even can be helpful.
Yeah, I sometimes use sprint days as a time to experiment with whatever was the cool thing that I learned about at the conference or camp.
Yeah.
I think the most successful instance of that was DrupalCon Los Angeles, where I'd seen a presentation about visual regression testing, like taking screenshots of two different versions of a site. And I had heard about it before, but I'd never like dedicated time to it. So I thought, well, here's a day where I've got basically 8 hours blocked off, and there's nothing like I really need to get done. This is just like a time for me to develop professionally. I'm just going to try that tool that I saw a presentation on, and there are people in the room, and maybe I can ask for help and find people are interested in the same thing. But like, I got it to work. I had a Drupal 7 site that like had a bunch of out-of-date modules, and I just wanted to like safely update all these modules. And the part that made it most satisfying was that it actually caught a regression. Like, I updated Panelizer, and on one content type out of like 10 content types and 2 view modes, no titles were printed twice. And I wouldn't have caught that had I just like manually clicked around. So being able to get my hands on this cool tool that I had just heard about immediately after was really satisfying.
That's awesome.
I'm curious, what makes a sprint successful in your mind?
I guess I haven't really sprinted. I've had this bad luck where we'll go to a sprint and my laptop will die. So I will work with someone else and like kind of shoulder sprint. And then I've done a lot of mentoring. So I think I come to sprints from a different perspective, and that's like watching other people solve issues and like watching someone who comes in and says like, I don't know what Drupal is, and I just went to the other room and got my laptop set up and I'm here, what do I do? And we usually take them through what we call the triage sprint, which is going through an issue and determining whether it's still a critical issue, and maybe doing some of the testing steps and like updating the issue. And I remember last year at Vienna, someone did that and they were so excited at the end of it, and that was for me like the reason why I mentor, just to like see the person feel so successful.
Definitely.
So yes, it's more like when I see other people care, I'm like,
Yeah.
this is why I'm here. So.
I agree with that too. I almost always wind up doing like the mentor side of things, or like helping people get like local dev environments set up, more than doing actual like patching myself. But that's really like kind of I don't know, electrical. You know, just the enthusiasm and seeing people like make connections with each other and get excited about stuff that people regression testing.
Get excited about new stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's why I really liked Midwest Dev Summit. Sorry for a second shout out, because it was like 2 days of sprints, but it wasn't
Can't pay for better
DrupalCon.
publicity.
It's just like it wasn't DrupalCon, so there wasn't so much mentoring to do. But so we had time to like actually sprint. So.
I would definitely not mind going to an event that was all sprint and no sessions.
Midwest Drupal Summit.
Yeah, let me know if you hear about it.
Where's that going to be?
Yeah.
Nearby.
It also
Yeah.
just provides a dedicated amount of time for people to work through an issue versus asynchronous, like someone updates an issue here, someone else picks up an issue there. 4 months passed, 5 people waited on it times, and then you're just like, let's all get it to a table for 10 minutes, let's hash it out, get the criteria, and go.
Yeah.
It can be hard to solve hard problems without a whiteboard.
Yeah.
Everyone can look and have a discussion, and it's not asynchronous. And even on video calls, it's just not the same as having the people in the room.
Yeah.
Where you're going to have go off, try 2 different approaches, come back, evaluate the approaches. Sprints are really good for hard problems, and then you get to meet people.
And I think one thing that I've had happen a lot, just over the years of going to different DrupalCons and events, is people coming up to me and maybe asking for an issue to work on, and then it's a lot of the times people will sort of say like, oh sorry, like I haven't been active in the issue queues like since last DrupalCon, and it's like I just always have to be like, no, it's fine, like it's like you don't have to like work on Drupal every day, like it's awesome that you're at the sprint, like yeah, we'll find you something to work on. But I've had a lot of people sort of apologize for like not.
I'm sorry,
or
Father.
to your
It's
point,
been 12 months since my last sprint.
to your point for like dropping the ball, like let's say they started on something at DrupalCon and then they went back to their life, like that's totally fine, like you probably moved that issue forward, and that's awesome.
It's the guilt of not being a good citizen in the ecosystem.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's good that people are thinking about that, but yeah, the guilt is not needed, in my opinion.
You're here now.
Yeah.
So this slide was more meant to be like what happens at contribution sprints at DrupalCon or also at Drupal camps. Just like an overview is like you come in. If you haven't done Drupal before, you generally go to the first time workshop where they'll set you up with the tools and install Drupal on your laptop. And then once you're done with that, you kind of graduate to either go to the mentored sprint, which is where you'll have like a mentor and there'll be a table of people working on a specific thing, or the contribution sprints or core sprints they call it, where everyone's kind of doing.
It's usually more topical.
Yeah.
So like if you want to work on X, you can go to the X table.
Yeah.
And even if you're new, you have all the tools and everything there. So there'll usually be people there that can still help you and like get you something to work on. And yeah, and I think like what you mentioned about like the workshop, that doesn't happen at every event, but DrupalCon has been doing that for a long time.
Yeah.
So your experience may vary because it's sort of, at the end of the day, it's up to the sprint organizers, like how they run it. So sometimes it's just going to be giant room and, go to a random table or something, and just, sometimes you have to kind of just ask around and say, hey, what are you working on? What are you working on? And then you can just find something that sounds interesting to you, hopefully.
Like the more successful sprint events actually have a lot of work going on in the background with people trying to find like lists of issues that they can help people get set up on.
Sort of the pre-preparation, yeah.
It's actually a lot of work.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
figuring out what are the issues that different skill levels can tackle.
Yeah.
That's sometimes more complex than figuring out how to solve the issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like there's a need for sprints to solve like the hardest problems in Drupal because you got all the core committers there perhaps, and they can work on the hardest thing. You also need to identify perhaps the easiest issues in Drupal where the goal isn't to like fix a complex bug. The goal is to get new people in the community comfortable just with like the
like,
issue queue workflow.
Like a one-line CSS patch
Right.
is a good example of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Where the hard part of the thing being figured out is just like, how do I make a patch?
Yeah, because I think that's the biggest thing, that like once you know the process of how the issue queue works and like how you submit a patch and sort of the workflow that then sort of happens after that, think once you're comfortable with that, then you're kind of free to, explore what you want. So usually, like if I'm mentoring someone at a sprint, I'll try and find something that's, kind of topical for them or something that they're going to be interested in. But at the same time, I'll often say like, hey, like here's just like a small thing, like triage is a good example, but like, even like a small patch, like here, like you can do this. It's not like maybe right up your alley, but you can learn the process. And then once you learn the process, then you can kind of like dig into, whatever area is really interesting to you, because then you'll be like, oh, I know how to make a patch, and so on.
Or test other people's patches.
Or test other people. Because that's the other things, like, we always need people to review, so I think that's one thing where, like, triage becomes really valuable. Because oftentimes, like, someone will put up a patch, but then it just can kind of sit there for a while and maybe becomes outdated, or...
It's not everybody's favorite topic, so it just sort of hang out.
Yeah. And then in terms of just like contribution sprints, at some of the events too, you'll have a live commit to usually core, but potentially that's to like a module or something. So that would be usually when the committer would kind of go up on some sort of stage usually and kind of walk through the process of how they would evaluate an issue or a patch. And that's sort of a whole process too, to Michael's point earlier of like the preparation, because that like you want to do something that people worked on that day, but it's got to be something small and like low risk, and it's kind of, that's a whole thing that happens kind of behind the scenes at like DrupalCon, is like people start to build out a spreadsheet of here's some potential issues that we could do for the live commit, but that's kind of fun. You get like a drum roll going, and yeah. Good.
My friend Kat got to do that, her first sprint.
Yeah.
She was so excited.
It's fun. I got to do a live commit at New Orleans, but it was like, it was basically a one-line CSS patch, if not...
a documentation patch?
No, it was CSS. But I went through, like, I didn't use any of shortcuts that I would use on my computer, and I went through like very in-depth, like here's the documentation that I refer to and here's the process. It was a very long live commit, but like
informative.
It helps people to see that stuff. It breaks it down.
Yeah, because I think it's an opportunity to kind of see the other side of it, because like sometimes you'll just put up a patch really quickly, and that's totally cool. But yeah, just to know sometimes that maybe some of the reasons why something might get sent back, and it's nothing personal. It's just there's a lot of standards and things.
What if I'm new to Drupal? Thought Michael was going to read the slides.
I was joking when I said, what if I'm new to Drupal? Can I participate in a sprint?
Yes, absolutely. So we mentioned this earlier, but at DrupalCons, usually we'll have the first time sprinters workshop. You'll get set up on your laptop, you'll get an intro to Drupal, an intro to the tools. Usually at camps, like Scott mentioned, there might not be like a designated person or time for that to happen, so you might have to ask around, be like, hey, I'm new, I haven't sprinted before, and most likely someone will be more than happy to help you. So.
Yeah, although if you're a camp organizer, you can absolutely make this happen.
Right.
Maybe not on the same scale that DrupalCon does,
Yeah.
but it's like something that you can like take responsibility for having.
Or even just have a sign, like if you're new, we
Right.
can help you get set up.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
contact so-and-so.
You know, backed up by people who will actually do that.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
but then there's other things aside from coding that you can do. Like my actual first sprinting experience at a DrupalCon was the doc sprint, and I think it was like a really similar type of experience to code sprints that I've been to, where like people were very willing to like, walk everybody through all the things you need, like having an account on D.O in the first place, and what you can edit, and like making sure that there's like a little bit of a thing on D.O of being not like authorized, like a recognized user, so that like you're not a spammer.
Oh, like verified.
Yeah, verified. So like
Yeah.
an existing user can get around that like waiting period by like just saying yes, this is a real person.
Yeah.
So like there were people doing that for each other, and
Right.
just sort of like
Slack, yeah.
yeah. And the documentation is important to everybody too. Like that's like a lot of people's first stab at like trying to learn how to do stuff. And what people were telling people at the doc sprint was being new is actually better
Yeah.
for things like that, because
Yeah.
everybody who's been doing Drupal for a long time just is kind of used to the way that stuff is, and like already knows all their shortcuts and everything. But when you're new, like you're getting all these fresh impressions and issues that you have, and you can like look at the documentation and go, this doesn't make sense, and then how could I make this make sense? And
Yeah.
work with somebody who does know how to do it, and then like really beef up that experience for others.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, I think a lot of the time, like if you see a sprint posted, like let's say it's at your local meetup or something, there's sort of a template that I think is probably still used today, where it's like, if you've ever used Drupal, like you can contribute, basically. Even if you've just like clicked around with things, like you said, like you could help with documentation. There's all kinds of even just testing, triage. Like you could test to try and go through the steps to reproduce a bug, or maybe there is a bug report but it doesn't have the steps needed to reproduce, and you can come up with that and take screenshots. And like there's always stuff like that that's helpful to move an issue forward and figure out the next steps for an issue.
Make sure that somebody who like solved an issue didn't create 2 other issues somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first few sprints I went to, I had it in my head like, I have got to write a patch today. Like this is only worthwhile. This is only successful for me.
Yeah.
If I post a patch and it gets committed, and that was not a helpful
At least
attitude.
300 lines of code.
Exactly.
What if I am a first-time sprinter?
See above.
Yeah, we
I
kind of
think
covered that.
I think we
in the
mostly
last
covered
slide.
that. Yeah, it's
Don't worry. Just
Yeah.
show up.
yeah, don't worry. And even like for this, that transitions I think nicely into the next one. Like, what should I bring? We talked about like people can help you get stuff set up on your laptop, but if you don't have a laptop, that's cool too. Like Fatima was saying earlier, like you can. No, it's super valuable. Like we actually for like sprint coordinators and stuff, like we totally encourage people to pair up together because it's an awesome way to learn, because you can kind of. Not only are you kind of vocalizing like the things that you're trying to figure out, like if you're trying to figure out, okay, like I need to apply this patch onto my local environment so I can test it, like if you're working with someone else, you're not just going to stare at the screen, like you're going to verbalize and say like, okay, what do we need to do, and like how do we find the documentation for this? So I think that's really valuable for a lot of people. I mean, people learn in different ways, but I think that's often super valuable, and you can kind of help each other out a lot, because at some events there's not necessarily the ideal ratio of mentors to sprint participants is the other factor there. So especially if you're running, like I've run a number of sprints locally in our city, and a lot of the time I was the only mentor. It was me, maybe sort of me and half of another person, like when they weren't busy or something like that. So I would heavily encourage people to like, okay, no, you put your laptop away, like you find someone else to work with, and like find an issue to work on, and then they could help each other like work through a lot of problems that way. And it took a little bit of the burden off of me as a mentor to help everyone all the time. So
Like instead of like everybody struggling with why MAMP won't load up this particular version of Drupal, they can like actually get look into interesting problems and whatnot.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a great example. Yeah, because like it's not necessarily a dead laptop. That's like that sucks.
That's an extreme
That
case.
sucks. But yeah, sometimes it's just like, yeah, if you can't get Drupal, if there's something wrong, like not working with your local environment, you don't have to like, that doesn't like ruin the sprint. Like you can still learn and contribute and have an awesome time. And maybe it's a happy accident, you know?
There was one like sprint that I went to early on when Drupal 8 came out, where like a lot of people were still on MAMP, or at least like at one table, and their website had gone down. So like there was some sort of like
the
PHP
MAMP
version.
website?
Yeah, like it totally was gone. I don't know, it was some kind of DNS issue or something like that, and like nobody could get like the plugin that would update the PHP version to the right version to run Drupal 8 alpha.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Like
That's rough.
Yeah, those things happen.
In terms of other things to bring, power strips or power bars, whatever you want to call them, are super valuable, because depending on the venue, you may run out of plugs, so you can. It's a good way to make friends, kind of. Snacks are good. Everyone likes snacks. Water bottle, things like that. It's great. Some sprints will specifically post that they're like kind of family friendly, so you can obviously bring. If that's the case, or you can always ask the organizer, like you can bring your kids, and they might not necessarily sprint, maybe they will, but you can bring things to
Get them started early.
Get them started early, or you can just like bring stuff for them to do or whatnot. But yeah,
I don't mind seeing kids.
yeah,
There was a nice camp in 20-something.
yeah,
Had 2 kids in it, both under 15, who got a patch in the core.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. I think I was there. That was awesome. Is there anything else that people should bring, or is that pretty good?
I think we're good.
All right.
Why agencies should care. Yes.
Why agencies
Why
should care
agencies should care
about the sprintings.
about the sprinting. I guess when I put up this question, I was thinking more like, when I go to a sprint, I usually learn a lot, and I find a new thing and I've learned about it, or I discover something that I didn't know how to use, or someone explains it to me. So I get a lot of professional development out of sprints, and that's good for my agency, because when I get back to work, I'm just a little bit better than I was before I went to the sprint. So that for me is very valuable.
First time I went to a DrupalCon sprint, I was working at an agency that wasn't all that connected to really any open source community. I think that agency and myself, and perspective I've heard from other developers who aren't deeply connected to the community, is there's a perspective that there is a they that writes Drupal.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
they are making these decisions,
Yeah,
and they
yeah.
decided to do Drupal 8 this way.
Yeah.
And going to a sprint is
Yeah.
a great way to see, like, it's just people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these people are not nearly as monolithic as it might appear from the outside. That first DrupalCon that I went to the official sprint day, and then at 5 p.m. we had to leave the university building that we were in. Some people said, let's go to this other co-working space. I figured, I've got nothing else to do. My flight isn't until tomorrow morning. I'm just going to go and see how long this goes. And by like 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. I was like, I can't believe there's people still hanging out. But it was WebChick, it was Merlin of Chaos, Earl Miles, who wrote views and panels, and I realized, like, on a very literal level, Drupal is written by the people who stay in the room. And my impression had been, there's this other group that I'm not a part of that are all computer science experts, and they write Drupal, and they are an intimidating group that's hard to approach. And by being in that room, it was very demystifying, and it made me much more comfortable to just hear, like, Eclipse GC pitching Earl Miles on context admin knowledge. I was like, no, I'm just going to eavesdrop. And eventually I worked up the courage to, like, pull up a chair and say, tell me about this new module. And that, like, I definitely did not get a patch into Drupal on that day, but just seeing how it worked was immensely helpful.
Yeah, it humanizes all the people who are behind this stuff, which, I mean, it's going to make you more confident, less worried about whether you made that patch or not, and, like, you can use like, the skills and if something is broken for you, like, a lot of times bigger projects, like, you might use that patch even if it's not in yet, just because, like, you know you need to fix something, and, like, it's going to come out, like, in the next version of Drupal, but meanwhile we need to fix prod. So, like, yeah, you too can be they.
Yeah.
Or they can be us.
I guess I've had this conversation with, like, a lot of people recently, but, like, there's a lot of people in core, like, ideally, like, we're all actually building real sites, but, like, not everybody who's working on core is necessarily building real sites, and the people who are, more like, all right, I'm doing this because either I get paid to do this by my work or whatever, love to hear feedback from people who are out there making actual sites.
For sure.
And, like, maybe it's like UX feedback, maybe it's like, it breaks when I do this, which should be in the issue queue, if that happens. But, like, that can be something that, like, people can help you get out there so that people can actually help you fix it.
Yeah, so I guess to try and tie that back into the agency angle, like, you almost have a way of I'm trying to find the right word, but you almost have a way of influencing, I guess, the direction that things go potentially. Like if you're in that discussion that Steve was in, and you say like, oh, actually, like that totally wouldn't work for like 100% of our client sites. then they might be like, oh, okay, we need to go back to the drawing board. And
Or it would make a great contrib module.
yeah. So it's I think it's valuable from that respect too. But yeah, I totally agree. Like yeah, it's I think what I've found is that kind of the skills that I've gained like through mentoring at sprints and stuff have directly applied to my day job, and like kind of pairing or just helping our developers at the agency, like to be able to help them solve problems. One thing that I always like to kind of pass on from Yes CT, Kathy, I believe it's, I can't remember how many seconds, I think it's a 5-second rule maybe. But basically if you are sort of pairing with someone and you're kind of, they're driving but you're kind of directing them, you can say, you know, let's say you say something like, okay, enable the views module or something like that, and you can kind of like in your head you can count to 5 and like let them do it. Like don't say like click on extend and then, or don't say like open the terminal and type drush en. Like let them figure out a way to do it.
Move over, let me drive.
Yeah, and don't try and avoid doing that. But it's, I think stuff like that is things like that I've learned. I've also applied to my day-to-day work in that, you know, kind of letting people figure things out for themselves, or maybe just giving them like a hint instead of like the full answer, like sort of like a breadcrumb trail to follow maybe.
I'm one of the junior developers that loves breadcrumbs. Like, don't give me the answer because I want to figure it out, but I really need something to get moving, and so that strategy works really well.
Yeah.
There's also just the transactional thing about social capital and reciprocity. If you just show up and you help Earl Miles or you help a bunch of people, you're more likely to have the confidence to even put that request in. They're more likely to see you in the issue queue and remember you. They're more. And while we shouldn't really look at these things as a transactional tit for tat, it's certainly. I don't know. Like when I started to contribute, people saw me more, and therefore my ideas just got more promoted and things happen quicker. So it's when you do have that one client that has that one module where there's a commerce upstream issue and Matt Gleiman has 40 projects and 180 issues he's tracking, he may pay more attention because I filed an issue and I helped him before.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Recognize the handle or whatever.
It's definitely something I saw when I was working at Palantir, and get stuck on some specific site building thing.
Yeah.
And one of my coworkers, who are like much more prolific in the contrib space, would say, "Oh, just go jump on IRC and ask that person." Like, yeah, that works for you when you've got 1,000 patches. If I do that, I don't.
We had a trick in our agency too, where we'd like ping the person that was the most active in the community to also and it's crazy. Just saying a +1 from someone else, all of a sudden you got traction.
Another thing not directly related to that conversation, but I noticed that like at work, I'll work on back-end things, and then I would go to sprints and be like, oh, I don't know how to like work on core. I had this like intimidation factor where I was like, I'm not sure that I can do anything. But then the more I went to sprints and I looked over people's shoulder at the code, I was like, this is the same sort of code that I play with at work, and so I could probably do some contribution here. And so there was a bit of like, I thought like kind of like the they, but I thought the code was like the code and very different from the code I do every day. And there was this moment where I realized, I was like, it's the same code. Like, why is it so scary?
Or like, let's say like you're watching somebody like Eclipse GC or somebody, like sitting here like, why isn't this working? And you're like, oh well, you're the same as me. Basically.
Yeah, totally.
And it's like
to your point earlier, it humanizes them.
Yeah.
And actually, Webchick has a really great, she's mentioned in I think at least one of her talks, but she has this blog post that talks about how making mistakes and not doing things perfectly is actually better in terms of like kind of interacting with an open source community. So it's like there's like perfect pat and Sloppy
Oh, yeah.
Sam or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And so Perfect Pat takes like whatever 3 days and like writes this amazing patch with test coverage, and like the coding standards are perfect
By themselves.
all by themselves in their basement or whatever, and then basically it sits there and it kind of sits in review, and then Sloppy Sam comes and writes this sort of like almost more of like a proof of concept patch. But then like asks people to review it, and they're like, oh, the coding standards need some work, but like the actual concept is really good, and like this might work. And basically how the story ends up is like, basically they end up with the two same patches, but Sloppy Sam interacted with like 3 or 4 different members of the community, and now kind of knows more people in the community, and has, to your point, has sort of some social capital now, because they're now a name that people have seen, and it's not just like, who is this Perfect Pat? I've never heard of this person. And so even though like the patch may be identical, like maybe Perfect Pat's issue gets closed as a duplicate because like they just kind of worked on their own, and like it's great, but this person kind of, even though they didn't really know what they were doing, they kind of got help and ended up with the same result. So I think that's really good to keep in mind, because I think it can be intimidating to upload your first patch, like no doubt about it.
Oh yeah.
Some of the first patches that I uploaded for Drupal core were like typo fixes, or like not even typos, like changing the capitalization. One of the first issues I worked on was changing like the capitalization of the core modules to be like I think it was like title case instead of sentence case or something like that. So it would be like update manager or update manager kind of thing.
On that process stuff too, like everybody who interacts in the queue gets credit on working on an issue, don't they? Like,
Now they do, yeah.
I mean, if you're like
Yeah.
taking, like, somebody put up a patch and you just applied it locally and been like,
And
oh, well,
tested
this
it.
breaks this thing, or
Yeah.
like this has bad CSS that
Yeah.
makes it overlap this other thing. Just because you didn't actually like take that and write more code doesn't mean that you're not also contributing with
Yeah.
that process.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's something that's evolved definitely for the better over the years. Is the and there's always room for improvement. I think it's not there quite yet, 100%. But yeah, being able to credit people who have tested a patch, or updated the issue summary, and being able to give them credit for that is awesome. Especially now, because that shows up on your Drupal.org profile too. So that can be good for your career. It's good for your agency, to come back to this point.
Oh yeah, you can actually credit your agency.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And there's a drop down for that. But
There's a
if you're
drop
working
down
on
for
something
that.
by yourself versus for work, you can actually like have your agency actually get credit for those commits along with your username.
Yeah, and that I believe it's called the marketplace on Drupal.org is sorted by one of the sorts anyway is by most number of contributions on Drupal.org. So it's it's sort of inexpensive marketing, I guess.
Some agencies provide it as like kind of a perk / thing that they do, where people actually take some amount of work time
Yeah.
to go to these kind of things and contribute back, so that
Or even like if you say like, oh, Friday afternoon you can work on contributing like every Friday afternoon or something. I know some companies do stuff like that. Yeah, totally. And you get that visibility.
I couldn't resist.
Contributing is awesome.
I think
Tell
we
us more.
covered why.
You get to meet people. You get to
meet
learn
people,
stuff.
You get to learn stuff. You get to go places.
It's good for your career. It's good for your agency.
Company. It's good for you.
It's good for
I'm going to
you.
actually go back to your one for 1 second.
Okay.
If your agency is doing something with Drupal, sprinting helps improve the product, which helps you do your job better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that's the obvious one here. Sorry.
Mhm. Yeah. For sure.
Oh, story time.
And I thought we would have a slide for just, our favorite stories from the sprint room. I guess my signature story is New Orleans was my first DrupalCon, and I'd gone by myself. And when I found out what the sprint room was, I was really intimidated. But somehow, I think on Thursday, I was waiting for 2 people who had a meeting in the sprint room. So I went in there, and sat in a corner and fell asleep while they were having a meeting, and then woke up later and left. And the next day was like sprint day, and I was like, well, I went to sleep in there, so I can now go in there and contribute. And I sat at a table. It just like lowered the intimidation factor by exponentially, and I was like, well, yesterday.
Are you a cat?
Well, the day I slept in there, it was
I wanted to know.
well, the day I slept in there was core committers, and you all had a whiteboard.
Yeah.
And it was a very serious discussion, and I did not understand a thing, but I remember it being so intense. And the next day, it was like happy people sitting at tables, and I was like, this is a downscale from what I experienced yesterday. And I sat at a table and I fixed a line of documentation. It was very exciting.
So we should put cots in the sprint room.
For the record, Scott, 14305-452, use proper name case for core modules. Appears to have been your first commit credit.
That's the one.
This goes on your permanent record.
Yeah.
If you can query databases, you can find it much easier.
But I think I also did this at Baltimore. Like I just waltzed into the sprint room, passed out snacks, like sat at a chair and took a nap. And like Lori was hungry, so I gave him chickpeas. Like it's become sort of a hangout / like I go in there just to chill and eventually take out my laptop. And so just making it more casual is what worked for me to not be so scared about like I have to go in there, I have to contribute, I have to write 300 lines of code, you know. So for me that really helped. So that's my favorite story.
I think like everybody who comes back to a sprint has some kind of story about how they felt welcomed and helped, you know, and like I always try to think about that, you know, whenever I'm doing like the mentoring or even just being in there.
Yeah.
That's like, you know, if somebody did that for you, you gotta be that person for other people,
Yeah.
you know, people shouldn't feel intimidated when they come in there or like, you know, wandering around like, can I sit here? Is this okay? Like, you know, gotta like reach out to like the new faces and like invite them to sit next to you or like just say
Yeah.
hi or
After my documentation contribution, I was a little bummed because, you know, other people working on really big things, and I like walked around and people were like, what did you do? Like, how'd it go? And I was like, I wrote a line of documentation. Everybody was like, high five! And I was like, oh, okay! You know? And it just like boosted my confidence, and I felt very excited about it. And it happened when I was mentoring in Vienna as well. Like, somebody closed a duplicate issue, and I was feeling bummed because I was like, you don't really get credit for that. Like, and he was like, pause, I need to send an email to my manager. He took a screenshot and like sent the email out and was like, I did a thing on Drupal.org. And I was like, wow, like, oh, that's the spirit, you know?
I think, you know, we're all part of the project and we know how great it is, right? To go to a camp or go to a DrupalCon and how inclusive we are and how we'd love to, anyone can come up and talk to us. But if you don't have that experience and you come to our event, have you ever been to a camp where it's not? All right? I mean, they don't know. They don't know what's going to happen. So you have to reach out because they could be really in a fearful place where they're like,
Yeah.
people might bite my head off.
It's easy for us to
might
forget
be
about it.
Really crotchety, a lot of really crotchety developers.
Or even just insular, you know.
Yeah.
I didn't show up to a Drupal camp for the first 4 years of using Drupal because Merle of Chaos scared the crap out of me in the issue queue. But because he was a little more gruff back then, and I just didn't want to be publicly smashed. But then at Drupal Camp Colorado, I happened to be sitting at a table next to him while him, Webchick, and someone else were talking, and I was like, okay, he's a person. I'm not just a person on the forum.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like, that fear just went right out the door. So.
Yeah, I almost left that DrupalCon San Francisco sprint because somebody was like very closely policing who was allowed in what room. Like, either you were allowed in the room for people who had committed to core yet, or you were not.
Oy.
And I was like, I went for a walk. And I almost just didn't come back. But I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
I ended, like, there was a reason for it. It was because they wanted to identify the people who were new and give them the mentoring they needed. But I felt like at that point I had to what I thought was enough to contrib modules, and I felt like, okay, just because I don't have a patch in core yet, do I really need to go back to what felt like this other room?
Right.
That's because it's like really good intentions, I suppose, but you know,
Yeah.
you can't necessarily know how you're coming off
Yeah.
to like the people who are showing up, and then like also like just because somebody's new to Drupal doesn't mean they're new to like you know development, PHP. Like you don't know, you could be like you know some like
Be symphony master.
so you could be
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
you don't know where people are coming from, so like it is really good to try to like reach out to new people, but you probably shouldn't assume that like people that you're dealing with are new.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know anything about the people who are coming in, so like you want to have that like available, but allow people to self-select a bit.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
Yeah, this felt like, no, you're not allowed in the
Yeah.
same room as Dries.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah.
This is restricted
I guess that's
airspace.
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
example of what didn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, I think probably like a lot of people have those like I got scared away from this because of issue queue interaction kind of
Yeah.
stories. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and like by definition, they're not here to tell us that.
Yeah, exactly. We're the people who are like, you know, literally or figuratively in the room.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I had a bad experience. It was like a re-roll, and I was like, oh well, it was a little bit after New Orleans. I was really excited. I did it. The person who was running the issue, I don't even remember who it was, just didn't respond. And then a couple of days later, I was like, maybe I did it wrong, so I tried it again. And then I also said, like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. So, like, if I did it wrong, like, let me know. And then someone else posted another re-roll, and immediately, like, the same day, the person responded, and the conversation continued between the two of them. And I was like, what did I do? You know? And then I remember, like, I just, like, sent the link to someone I'd met in New Orleans, and I was like, hey, like, what happened here? And they were like, it happens, like, don't take it personally. Like, and if you really want feedback, you can just like ask the person, like, hey, did I not do the patch right? Did I not this? And so that was kind of for me, like, it was a point where I was kind of like, this is scary now, you know. So
Yeah.
That totally contributes to our long tail issue, doesn't it? It's like you get a lot of people in who like interacted in the issue queue or at sprints like once,
yeah,
you know, and then we're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
You know, don't come back.
yeah.
And then maybe they go off to other projects. Maybe they.
Because it's hard to go
Yeah.
back if you're not being mentored into it again.
Yeah. We have to keep that in mind, like every time that we do anything like this. That you know, you like code aside, like you want to keep people around.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you know, for
Yeah, it's like, what are we really sprinting on? Are we sprinting on the code, or are we sprinting on the community? Are we trying to...
That's deep.
I kind of think of sprints as just like practice for when we're not all in the same room. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
the successful sprint isn't the one with the most patches necessarily. It's the one that like gets people comfortable with like how things are working.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of a way to like practice what you're going to do when you're not in the same room.
Spread the agency around a little. Don't force everybody to have been personally mentored into it by WebChick. We only got one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you have any stories, Scott?
I don't know. There's one that comes to mind, but I don't think it's really helpful. So,
Just
Tell.
It's story time.
okay. I guess I'll try and pivot. So, like, my experience with sprinting was sort of that. My introduction to contribution happened online, not at a Drupal event. So I went to core contribution mentoring in IRC, and that's sort of how I got onboarded into the Drupal.org issue queue and how to make patches and rerolls and all that kind of stuff. So I was able to kind of learn in the comfort of my own home, and then I kind of just kept going to that every week, and then eventually they got sick of me and asked me to help mentor other people. And so the first sprint that I actually attended, I ended up mentoring at. So that was kind of crazy. It was kind of a lot to do all at once, but like even though I was scared, like it went fine, and one thing that I had to get past with sprint mentoring is sort of the feeling of kind of like I was mentioning earlier, having to kind of help everyone all the time. That was something hard for me to get past, and like but I think it's actually more helpful to let people be able to solve their own problems without always kind of needing the crutch or whatever you want to call it of being like, hey, experienced person like or mentor, how do I do this thing? But it's kind of the like teaching them how to fish rather than like handing them a fish.
Like the trial run.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you're breaking down the process for people and where they can like reference like what statuses can this issue have? Is it okay if I change that? Is
that
yell at me?
allowed?
Like,
Do I need to run that by Reeves?
That form is scary.
It is. It totally is.
There's so many form fields.
It's so scary.
On that like online topic, I guess like we could talk about like IRC and Slack and like all the places that people who can't physically get to one of these type of events can find people
or even ways to kind of keep work going in between sprints potentially. Yeah.
And there's like a couple of Slack channels on the main Drupal site. It's like drupal.slack.com.
Yeah, for the Drupal Slack, they've condensed it all into the contribute channel, so that's just it's 24 hours a day. So, like, can you review this? Can someone test this?
Yeah. But like a lot of people who are like major core contributors have like never been to DrupalCon. Yeah. Like there's a lot of people out there that like distance, money, like health, family obligations, like money, all those things. But like you can still be involved, in Drupal like at a really deep level. If you can like make connections with people online and be in these places.
Yeah.
IRC's not totally abandoned, and the Slack is pretty active, and there's that Rocket Chat, D.O, obviously.
It doesn't have to happen at a sprint room at a camp or conference.
Definitely, yeah.
But that helps.
Yeah, I think oftentimes like a sprint can be sort of a jump start for like let's say an initiative or something. In certain cases, like especially like at a DrupalCon when you've just got a lot of bodies. Poor wording, but bear with me. you can actually get a lot done. Like at DrupalCon Portland, we were kind of up against the deadline of getting Twig into core, and we ended up a group of us ended up recruiting all these front end developers to do performance testing for each and every Twig template that we were putting into core, and that was a crazy amount of work, and like each person had to set up XHProf and all these different things on their laptop, but people were like, "Hey, I want to help," and they did it, and it was awesome. So we had like a Twig army going. Yeah,
Twig army.
Twig army.
But you got it in.
But yeah, like it's pretty amazing. Even though that's not always the point, or that's not always how it goes. Like sometimes things just line up, and it's crazy what you can get done if you have enough people and who are willing to help.
So we're out of time, almost.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Can you advance? All right.
The next slide's just thank you.
Thank you.
Stop recording.
Is there? Does anyone?
Quick
Does
question.
anyone else want to say things? We have 2 minutes.
Yeah.
No. Yes, maybe. Going once.